You see, I think last week the people did to me what the title of your show. Your show was about being muzzled, and somebody put on a muzzle.
I must tell you, they do it all the
So,
time,
but
you
here
know.
I am, and I'm happy to be here with you because there is so much happening. And what we've agreed to talk about tonight is the issue of the transport board.
Mm-hmm.
And I chose a topic. I said transportation as a public good in Barbados.
Mm-hmm.
Privatization of the transport board is not a good idea. And essentially, this has been an issue for many years about, whether the transport board should be run by government. I am old enough to know when they had private companies and then they were acquired by the government. And I saw the introduction of ZR vans and minibuses and all of that. And for many years, what we have had is a mix of publicly owned transportation, mass transportation, and private entrepreneurs, business people participating. Recently, the public would have been privy to a document that was circulating. I think it was a letter addressed to the General Secretary of Barbados Workers Union. Here it is, divestment of the Barbados Transport Board. And I think I'll just very quickly read parts of that. It was written to General Secretary, dated November 7th, which would have been just over a week ago. And it says, the government of Barbados has been reviewing the operation of the public transportation sector with a view to making it more efficient and to further economically enfranchise persons within the country who wish to participate in this sphere of economic activity. It is also part of the process of restructuring the Barbados economy. And in this regard, there is no doubt that a modern and efficient public transport system will provide positive benefits that will redound to the enhancement of the economic landscape. And it went on to talk about a number of things. The reform is predicated on the basis of divestment of the Transport Board and the proposed establishment of the Barbados Mass Transit Authority to be the regulatory entity for the sector. With regard to the Transport Board, the Cabinet has agreed that it be divested on the basis of the following proposals: that all of the workers at the Transport Board be severed and that discussions be held with the unions on the subject of separation packages. 2, opportunities be created for those workers who wish to be economically enfranchised by becoming an owner-operator of the buses and or providing cleaning, bus washing, and security services. And it went on and on. Now, Marcia and audience, I would say that some of that sounds good, huh? But there are a couple of things that we have to start. First of all, we have to understand or ask ourselves what has been the philosophy guiding the provision of public transport in Barbados and across many places in the world, and what should perhaps be that philosophy. And if you think about it, public transportation, especially on a small island like this, we have an extensive road network and so on. That transportation has enabled any Barbadian, and working class Barbadians, lower income earners in particular, to get to work, to ensure that children are able to get to school, and that generally there is the provision of reasonable, adequate. We've had challenges across administrations, but anybody who has lived in Barbados, and I use post-independence because that is 1966 is the year that I started taking a bus to school. Before that, I used to walk from home to St. Stephen's School. And so at the end of any analysis of the issue of transportation, one can conclude that transportation is a public good. In other words, public transportation as provided and supported by governments, in fact, subsidized by government, if efficiently done, really contributes to the economic development, the social well-being of a country. And, Barbadians like to look elsewhere for sources. I don't necessarily have to do this, but I thought I would share the first slide that I have here, talks about public transportation as a driving force behind economic development. And it really is from an article, and I've cited the title of it and the source, and the reference for it, the impact of public transit on the workforce and local economies in the United States. And what this says, it goes on to say, the excerpt that I have, public transportation systems play a pivotal role in society that extends beyond just moving people from point A to point B. They provide essential mobility options to members of the community, along with having a direct impact on energy consumption, air quality, and carbon emissions. I'm going to pause there and connect that to Barbados in terms of the relationship between that and public transportation. I have seen across Barbados a significant increase, and I don't think it's a figment of my imagination, a significant increase in the number of vehicles on the road. And there are concerns with that because a vehicle is not cheap in Barbados. Fuel is not cheap. We have concerns about the level of emissions of carbon monoxide, I think that's the correct title, on, the carbon emissions, as it is referred to here, on people. We have a high level of respiratory issues. I myself suffer from something called allergic rhinitis, and smoke and certain kinds of situations aggravate my respiratory tract. And people suffer from asthma. Go to the hospital any day and check out the asthma bay. The number of children, including babies, for example, who have crises and have to go there. So when we talk about transportation, we're not only talking about the economic benefits. And how do you link these economic and health and environmental benefits? We talk about energy consumption. We in Barbados import significant amounts of fuel, and anytime oil prices rise, we know what happens to gasoline prices, etc. So the point I'm making is that where we can have a reliable, efficient public transportation system, Barbadians would have to be less concerned about acquiring their own private vehicles. So in essence, it becomes more optional than absolutely necessary, if you see what I mean. So at the end of the day, when we look at it, what I was, those illustrations saying is that public transportation enhances economic development by providing access to various societal locations such as employment, education, healthcare, entertainment, cultural institutions. We talk tourism in there. I saw somebody in a comment referring to the popularity of ZRs among visitors, and so essential amenities are positively or negatively impacted by the availability, the quality, reliability, etc. of our public transport system. As we know, in Barbados, our transport system is operated primarily by government. Government has, over the years, successive governments have subsidized it. Now, I have heard people talk about profitability, etc. And if we think in terms of privatizing, as suggested in the letter and the extracts that I read from that letter, what we would see is that if government stops subsidizing, there's almost an automatic expectation, or not even an expectation, but an automatic consequence that we will see higher fares. People are already concerned about the significant increase in bus fares in the last 5 to 6 years. And so when you now say government is going to get out of the business altogether, and if they are getting out of the business, it is highly unlikely. In fact, it would make no sense to get out of the business of providing, and this person makes an important point, providing subsidized public transportation, which, and I would read from the comment, is necessary for national productivity by workers, school children, and the general social movement of citizens. That is really why government sees it as a public good. The benefits go beyond an individual who has to catch the bus. The benefits go to employers. If tomorrow or at the end of the year or whenever this thing should happen, government says, okay, we are not subsidizing, because to subsidize private operators would be to do what they could have done in the old arrangement. The expense for bus fare goes up. Right now, an individual taking one bus to work and one bus home spends $7. An individual who has to take two buses, that money goes up to $14 a day. And I heard in some other presentations and discussions of this that we can look at bus fares going up to $5 or whatever each way, or you may, whatever it is. The point is that as soon as bus fares increase, workers will turn to their employers and say, look, we need more money because my salary is already stretched to the limit and I cannot make it to work daily on this and provide bus fares for children. We also anticipate that arrangements to subsidize children have been riding on the bus for free for many years in this country. To have them pay the same rate or any rate at all changes the expenses of that family. So what we are seeing here is that and I repeat myself, there are many benefits beyond the immediate provision of rides from point A to point B to individuals. So if you look at that, the first argument that we have, or the first issue that we have to settle as a country and as a government, whoever is the government, and policymakers, and even private sector decision makers, is to ask yourself, what are we seeking to do with the provision of public transportation? And I'll just share this quickly. And this is a reference from Mode Shift is an organization in the UK where people promote the value of public transportation and other kinds of means of trying to, travel around the country. So the chief revenue officer of this company, Mood Shift, Margaret Clouston, had this to say in sharing her perspective on why we need to invest in public transportation as a way of promoting economic growth, and also how it creates the value of creating a strong transit network. And I quote from her, she said, investing in public transportation isn't just about moving people. It's about moving communities forward. Reliable transit systems provide the vital arteries for the flow of workers, goods, and ideas that fuel economic growth and opportunity. And so at the heart of this is the notion that we really have to ensure that whatever decisions are taken about mass transit, because that's what we're talking about, moving, our buses, our ZRs or taxis, however we define public transportation, the sum total of that must be so designed and delivered that it allows the public to get to work efficiently, that we are able to manage the costs to the individuals in a way that does not overburden, the person. So in terms of looking at that background, what you're really faced with is not a simple decision of we have buses and we're going to get rid of them and people are going to get them and wave a magic wand and people will be rich. Now, what I've chosen to do, because I've heard discussions about the letter, but I think it is absolutely important to also understand some of the comments, some of the positions taken by this government. And I will highlight these because if we go back to the beginning of the year, for example, we have heard that we have we have, or we can expect, that the government was going to make some changes or whatever the case may be. And I would have expected, when you look at the timeframes, I'm going to share something from February this year. Discussions, comments have been made by the government prior to that. If we look at that, my question is, why is this thing appearing to be sudden? Because I will explain why I say sudden. So if you can make that larger, Dave, for the audience to see, what I have done here is to identify a couple sources of information which help you to see what government's position has been. And I've taken, in the two that are on the screen, the first one is an article in Barbados Today of the 26th of February of this year, in which it is I think it would have been the Deputy Prime Minister, I think she's Cynthia Bradshaw, who's responsible for the Transport Board. And it says, a new era for public transport if done right. And it says the government of Barbados is on the verge of one of the most significant overhauls of the island's public transport system in decades. The planned merger of the Transport Board and the Transport Authority into a single mass transit authority promises greater efficiency, reliability, and improved regulation. But as with any major reform, its success will depend on proper implementation, robust enforcement, and meaningful stakeholder engagement. And it is against this comment that I assess some of what I have seen appear not in March, not in April, not in July, but in November. And I look at it, proper implementation. Proper implementation will depend on proper development, the proper articulation, design, and development of the system that you want to put in place. And here so if you don't have that if you don't have a proper understanding of what is happening, how can we anticipate proper implementation? So before we can get to robust enforcement, we also have to think in terms of meaningful stakeholder engagement. And my question is, who are the key stakeholders here? And what level of engagement through the sharing of information have we seen between February, it was February 26th. And right in front of us, we have a second article where, if you go back up, Dave, before we get to the promise, the government ministers to take up transport overhaul next week. Next week would have been the 9 and 7, 16, the 16th of September or somewhere around that. And this article, again, drawn from the Barbados Today, says, the government used the Transport Board's 70th anniversary service to place sweeping reforms of public transport, with ministers to consider proposals on modernization, sustainability, and improved service by next week. Acting Prime Minister and Minister of Transport and Works, Cynthia Bradshaw, said on Sunday. She declared this reform is about building a stronger, more accountable institution and more efficient organization that can better meet the needs of the Barbadian public. As minister, I want to reaffirm the government's full commitment to the transformation. Reliable public transportation is a critical pillar of national development. We all agree to that. Whether it's education, whether it's healthcare, whether it's in relation to our social services, we all see the same thing. Now, my question is, between February, the end of February of this year, and the middle of September, and I put the question out there to our audience and to other stakeholders, has the government and the minister responsible for transport shared with stakeholders proposals for this divestment? And I raised that the biggest all of us are shareholders and stakeholders because we're talking about taxpayers' money. And if they are suggesting that there will be savings from doing this, show us how. Show us how a system that covers the entire 11 parishes will be so reformed and redesigned to ensure the efficiency that they promise. I may be wrong, but I am yet to see anything. And I'm in my checking. I have not asked every category of stakeholder or all Barbadians, but in my checking, nobody could point me to any documentation, any detailed proposals for this. So this really, to my mind, when we think in terms of a system of transformation or a plan to transform, again, we see the kind of error. If it has not already been made, it is in the making, because it cannot be something restricted to workers of the Transport Board. Because remember, the letter was written to the General Secretary of the Barbados Workers Union, who coincidentally, for those who might forget, and I don't suppose the average body forgets, the General Secretary of the Barbados Workers Union is a stakeholder in the government. She's a member of Parliament. And therefore, she's part of the parliamentary group, even though she is not a cabinet member. She should be fully apprised of government's plans. So my interpretation of that is, even if she does not or did not, until that letter was written, communicate anything to her members, she should have been fully seized of government's plans as a member of the parliamentary group and as an MP, which makes her part of that group. So my question really and truly is, what are they planning to do? I also would have cited an article there. I didn't have the extracts, but I have it here. It was an article, Dave, if you go back up to it was just the reference, where the one before this, where at the bottom, I gave a reference so people can understand. But that reference at the bottom here today, it says from a facebook.com, Barbados Today, Prime Minister Mia Montley has set up proposals to revamp the public transport, and this is an article, PM Mulls AI privatization in public transport overhaul. Prime Minister Mia Montley, and I'm reading from the article. That's it, Dave. You got it, so you can scroll down if you want to. Prime Minister Mia Montley has set out proposals to revamp the public transport network with artificial intelligence at the heart of plans to optimize bus routes and a new mass transit authority to regulate a fully privatized transit system. Just days before the Transport Board celebrates its 70th anniversary on Sunday, when it began a 24-year period of state takeover of private concessionaires, the Prime Minister was again touting the privatization of the bus company under new regulator. Now, those are nice fancy words, and that is my concern. We hear these things all the time. Speaking at the St. John edition of the Ideas Forum on Monday night, Montley said that the Ministry of Transport had an obligation, in my view, and I'm quoting her, or at least she's being quoted in the article, has an obligation, in my view, to be able to carry us to the next level and to be able to see what is the optimization of bus routes in this country that are not simply in and out of city. Framing the issue as part of a larger vision for decentralized services, the Prime Minister challenged the traditional model of bus travel centered on Bridgetown. Now, you know, the Prime Minister of Barbados is perceived as being very gifted with her words, very articulate. But I like to dissect words. I like to ask myself, what exactly, in simple terms, are you telling me? Because remember, the title of the thing, it says that the Prime Minister was offering proposals. It says Prime Minister Money has set out proposals to revamp the public transport network. I challenge any of the viewers or anybody who read this article or who might have participated in that ideas forum to give me 3 concrete proposals. I hear about AI, but AI to be used in respect of what exactly? You know, you're talking about a new regulator. Yes, we've heard about the creation of a transit authority. You've talked about it being part of a package of the what they called it again. You talked about decentralization and decentralized a vision of decentralized services. My concern, colleagues, is that what we are hearing and seeing all the time, and people get offended when I use the word, a set of buzzwords. So I would say something else. What we are getting all the time are some fancy sounding, very generic and generalized statements from which we cannot deduce any concrete things. And I say that I maybe it is my discipline, it is my background, which is in management, which is in getting things done, which is in decision making, which is about implementing and evaluating things that you put in place. But I listen to that and I ask myself, what is going to change? How is it going to change? What is the effect of that change? And so at the heart of all of this, Marcia, and I see your peer, which means you're getting ready to tell me to wrap up, is that we had a letter saying government was going to do something, sell off electric buses. And there was a discussion on your show about the pros and cons of that. What I have sought to do in what I've said is, look, you can't take that in isolation. A bus system which is supposed to achieve the objectives that I set out cannot be put in the hand of disparate individual drivers. One have a bus here, one has a bus there. Partly because if I start from where y'all were discussing, operational costs and so on for an individual, especially because right now the buses are subsidized. Operational costs will not allow those individuals taking people's gratuity, their severance, or whatever, and putting into that is like, you're feeding a hungry elephant. So that money will easily disappear and they would be worse off than when they started. That is at the level of the business person. At the level of citizens like you and I who will drive on the buses, all the old age pensioners, the school children, etc. Tell us, how will you continue to deliver, or if you will continue to deliver services to those persons? So what I really wanted to say to people is, look, pause and contextualize the contents of that letter. What is it that we've sought to achieve as a country? What has made it work? How has it contributed to the cost of living, the quality of living, and the ability not only of the traveler on the bus, who is the worker for the most part, but how has it contributed to the profitability and the stability of business operations? And I can go on, because what I hope I have been able to demonstrate is that this is not a simple issue. It is complex.
Yes.
It is linked into every sector of this economy. And if you damage it, the damage is not only individual, the damage is collective. And it's going to be felt across all strata of this society. And I think that I can stop there, Marcia. When I am watching the rest of the show.
Yes.
After the discussion of this, I heard a news item where Roy Trotman, former General Secretary, and I presume he is still a consultant to the current general secretary, was responding to an invitation to the union. And so it says to me, I would have to go and see if I can find his words, but I listened.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so he has indicated that the union is considering whatever. So I will research that. It is interesting.
And if you need to, just hang around, and if you need to jump back on, please do. One of the things I want to say to the people of Barbados, Miss McClean, is that they have the power to stop this.
Of course.
This is only a proposal, Barbados. We have the power to stop this. This is what the opposition leader response is to this proposed privatization. Realize it's a proposal, and I'm telling you right now, this is going to stop dead in the tracks. They are worried wherever they are right now. They are running helter skelter trying to fix this problem. And I tell you, government, this BLP government, you have a problem on your hands, because you are not going to implement this in this country. Not if it's the same Bajans I saw on the streets yesterday. Not if it's them same people.
You know, Marcia, this is again what. But let me say this: the government, the Prime Minister, as Minister of Finance and head of government, would have negotiated with the IMF. This is standard IMF recommendations. Get out of the provision of social goods, of public goods. Get out of the provision of these things. And in doing this, you are destroying the very things that built this country. And yes. I would dare say, and I will say this because I was at the university only Friday at an event. And as I said, I am writing about it. I know there were shortcomings in how it was done. People criticize, and for those people criticize the government when they introduce a 20% fee to students. This is nothing, or that, let me say, is nothing compared to what this would do to this country. And remember, this is part of a package of things. The next thing you will hear about is health.
But you know, Miss McClean, I was going to say, but you know, this might not be Barbados until I heard the R word. Then I knew.
No, there's a lot of rain. I was checking some messages. A lot of rain has fallen. Funny enough, only on Friday, I told some folks at the beach that we hadn't seen our weather yet for the year, because this is the first rain of this kind that I've seen.
The call again, Miss McClean. I'm going to go right ahead and talk about the letter.
Okay, I sent a clip to Dave to show. I think the question was whether the letter was real or otherwise. There's a clip which I shared with him. It's Sir Roy Trotman speaking. Let's say in the absence of the General Secretary, who is out of the country. Dave, I don't know if you can share that clip. I think it would have been from VOB. That would have been Friday evening, I believe. You have to check the date. But reference is made to the plans, I suppose you can describe it, of the transport board. Interestingly enough, in my check-in, I also came across a comment from Saroy about 7 years ago on this issue of the transport board, and the headline said that he was not in favor of privatization. So if you play that, then you could, so that people could hear, because the reason why I shared the older one as well is the union is supposed to have been talking for 7 years and we don't have a plan. And so this comes like a thief in the night, you know. And then there are comments, if you read the stories, the people from the ZR community are asking for information and all of that. And remember, the Prime Minister talked about stakeholders and keeping people informed and participate, involve stakeholders, etc. So I think people need to understand the realities. And I asked the question, why are these things released when the General Secretary is not around?